Chapter 39. Into the Desert. Great winged beasts wove through the air, their bird-like features silhouetted against the star-studded sky. Their harsh screams were like those of an eagle, but only their heads and feathered forelimbs bore any resemblance to the esteemed creatures. As one of these beasts swooped towards a Gerudo, the warm glow of torchlight revealed a rider perched on the creature's back. The massive animal, its hindquarters resembling the body of a cat, tore through the air. Then, only seconds after the bird had appeared, Link heard a distinct twang, and a crossbow bolt thudded into the beast's ribs. The creature shrieked, its rider somehow managing to stay in the saddle as his mount flailed in the air, trying to gain altitude, and then slammed into the inner wall that ringed the fortress. The sound of footsteps running up the stairs behind him made Link turn around. Avil reached the top and nearly ran into him. "Stop gawking, boy!" she snarled. Any further words were caught in her throat as she grimly took in the fighting in front of them. "How are we supposed to get out of here now?" Link asked in dismay. "Same way as planned," Halvard replied, coming up behind Avil. "Have faith, dear boy. Once we're close enough to the gate nearest the river, all we need to do is use the portal stone. Just stay close." Shrinking back out of sight, Avil led them into the shadows of a nearby section of the wall. They could still see the doorway they had come through off in the distance, but nobody pursued them. The main gates were choked with Gerudo as they rushed to attack the invaders, so Link's small party was left to find another route. He kept wondering why Kotake was no longer pursuing them. Had the Gerudo slain her? Before Link could contemplate this further, and as he crouched in the shadow of a storehouse, a harsh cry from one of the circling birds got his attention. "What are they?" Link whispered to Navi. "Griffins," Navi answered. "I never expected to see one." "How about admiring them some other time?" Avil said snappishly. "Right now, we need to focus on getting you out of here." "And they think I'm impatient," Navi muttered. Without another word, Avil motioned for Link to follow, and then dashed out from their meager cover. They darted through a door and along a series of galleries separated from the courtyard by carved screens. Most of the guards were gone, rushing to the aid of their kin. Before long, Avil led the way up a flight of stairs and into a lavishly decorated balcony. It overlooked a throne, seated beneath arches of gilded white stone that offered the king a view of the courtyard where his people would gather to gain an audience with him. The gardens were empty now, but the rise and fall of the sounds of battle suggested that this wouldn't be the case much longer. Avil didn't linger. She waved for Link to follow, and he let her guide him out of the king's courtyard, through a narrow doorway, and into another yard. Doing his best not to focus on the sight of the dead riders and griffins that lay on the cold flagstone, Link hurried after Avil until they reached another building. It was a tall, but otherwise relatively small, stone structure, engraved with the figure of a woman in a modest garb, and flanked by columns decorated with pictures Link didn't recognize. As the trio reached this building, which Navi guessed was some sort of shrine, they ducked behind a column as two of the griffin riders flew across the yard. When they had vanished into the night, Halvard motioned for Link and Avil to keep moving. Link kept an eye out for the witch as he ran. There was still no sign of her. That concerned him. Would Kotake know they were headed towards the stables? If she did, escaping would be all but impossible. The witch would have her allies on them before they made it very far. They finally reached the stables, only to discover that there were a dozen guards standing watch in the yard. Link's heart sank, and he reached for his sword. Avil held out her hand, gesturing for him to stay his blade. He gave her a questioning look, and she shook her head subtly. "They're on our side," she whispered. before walking up to the leader of the group of Gerudo, who wore a necklace of precious stone and kept her hair down. "Shinju," Avil called. "Are the horses ready?" "They are, Avil," the woman named Shinju replied. She glanced questioningly at Link and Halvard from behind her raised veil. "Where is the other captive? The Sheikah?" Avil's brow knit in mild confusion. "You haven't seen her?" "I'm right here." Shinju cursed, drawing her two swords as Sheik materialized in front of the Gerudo. Shinju's companions muttered startled curses of their own and lowered their halberds. "At ease," Avil ordered them, gesturing for everyone to keep their weapons down. "She's on our side." Shinju frowned, nodding at Sheik before sheathing her blades. "It is not wise to sneak up on a Gerudo." "Nor is it wise to draw your weapons on a Sheikah," Sheik said flatly. She ignored the pointed stares from Avil's guards and turned to address Link. "What happened? I almost decided to come after you." "The witches attacked us," Halvard answered grimly. Sheik's eyes went wide, and then she turned a menacing glare on the masked merchant. "I thought you said they were in Ganondorf's tower." "They weren't fooled," Avil said grimly. "Not for long enough, anyway." "Where are they now?" Sheik demanded. "Kotake killed Kome," Avil said. "She did?" "By accident," Avil said flatly. "I do not know where Kotake went, but we can discuss this later." Sheik nodded. "Epona's waiting for you, Link. Let's hurry." Moving past Sheik and Avil's guards, Link stepped inside the stables and was greeted with the familiar smells of straw, horse, and saddle polish. He looked around, seeking the sight of Malon's beloved mare. There were 5 horses in all. They whinnied restlessly, their ears flat as they eyed the intruders. Link had no doubt the battle raging outside had them on edge. The 3rd horse in the row of stalls was Epona, saddled and laden with his saddlebag. 2 more horses had been prepared for the journey, and were also laden with provisions. The Gerudo had taken great care to make sure their horses were well looked after. Their water troughs were full, and they had plenty of feed, and both tack and saddle were clean. Shinju and Avil stepped into the stable behind Link, conversing quietly. "We can lead you to the northern gate," Shinju was saying, "but we cannot journey with you to the Desert Colossus. Not without arousing suspicion." Link didn't pay attention to the rest of the conversation. His focus was on Epona, as he approached her stall. She was staring at him oddly, ears flat and eyes wary. "Hey, girl," Link said as he approached her, puzzled by her reaction. "Epona, it's me." Without warning, Epona lashed out with one back leg. Link threw himself to the side, barely avoiding a blow to the head. He crashed into the hay, grunting as he landed on his side and rolled over. Epona neighed shrilly, and when he looked up, Link could see the whites of her eyes. "Epona, what are you doing?" Link exclaimed, not understanding why the horse was acting so odd. "She doesn't recognize you," Navi said, as Link scrambled back up and took a few steps back from the frazzled mare. "What?" Then it hit him. The Gerudo mask. He was still disguised as a Gerudo. "Of course she doesn't recognize you," Link thought to himself, feeling utterly stupid. "Idiot," said Avil, echoing the voice in Link's head. Link frowned. He wanted nothing more than to say a few choice words to the Gerudo, but he doubted that would be a good idea. "I almost pity the stable hands," Navi said wryly. "They'll probably be glad to be rid of her." "Over here," Halvard called. He was scraping a bundle of straw away from one corner of the stable, uncovering a chest beneath it, which he quickly unlocked. Link's equipment was inside, including the Master Sword, still sheathed in its scabbard. Link approached the chest and grabbed the sword without unsheathing it. Despite how much he had hated using the blade when he'd first received it, Link felt an enormous sense of relief to have it back. The gem was glowing faintly, but he surmised that was probably because there were moblins or boblins nearby. Digging through his saddlebag, he slipped Impa's ring on before finding the belt of sages, his bow, and his quiver. The belt, he noted, was still missing the medallion of water. He'd never have time to retrieve it from Gerudo. "Our absence will soon be noted," said Shinju, a note of urgency in her voice. "If you are to escape, we should leave now." "I'm ready," Link told her. He strapped the scabbard behind him and turned to his scratched and battered shield. He considered grabbing it and leaving the mirror shield behind. It is just a shield, he thought, looking longingly at the faded emblem of the phoenix on its battered frame. It might have been just a shield, but it had saved his life on more occasions than he cared to remember. "I don't think carrying that would be a good idea," Navi whispered. "A Gerudo carrying a Hylian shield would not go unnoticed. Your disguise would be useless." She's right, Link thought, feeling foolish that he hadn't considered that. "Are you finished yet?" Avil asked impatiently. "Yeah, I am," Link replied, ignoring the Gerudo's harsh tone. Link placed the Hylian shield in the chest and returned to Epona. Determined as he was to escape, he couldn't help but feel a tingle of fear creep down his spine. There was a good chance he would be caught. He climbed into the saddle, feeling a surge of relief to finally be riding again. It wasn't enough to quell his fear. He knew that getting out of the fortress was going to be difficult, even on horseback. With a swift nudge to Epona's sides, Link rode, following Shinju and her companions into the night. Sheik, who was riding double with Avil, was using the medallion to conceal herself, so that it looked like only Avil was riding. Link marveled that her horse wasn't the slightest bit perturbed by the invisible rider on its back. Epona would not have been so placid. They rode in the open, through the yard, and on towards a gate. Link felt ill as he rode past the guards who stood near their posts, but their attention was elsewhere, and they paid little mind to Avil's company marching beneath the gate's wide arch and into the city beyond. Once they were out of the main fortress, Link's party went slowly to keep pace with their guards. Some of the Gerudo doubled back to make sure they weren't being pursued, while others darted forward to scout ahead. Link's heart was somewhere in his throat. They were so close to freedom, yet not quite close enough. Where were the other Gerudo? "We're halfway there," Halvard called, after a few minutes of travel through the narrow roads. They turned a corner towards the wall, when Avil suddenly pulled her horse to a halt, one hand across her forehead as she grimaced in pain. The other Gerudo felt it too, similarly grasping their heads and bracing themselves. "Avil?" Link heard Sheik ask. "What's wrong?" Link reined in Epona, slowing down to help Avil. Several of her guards were already moving towards the horse, but before he could reach her, Avil waved him off, lowering her hand. "Shinju, check the way ahead is clear," she said sharply. Without a word, the other Gerudo nodded, taking some of her companions with her and slipping off into the night. "Damn it," Avil hissed. "He's here!" "Who's here?" Halvard asked, the color rapidly draining from his face. He already knew the answer. "Ganondorf," Avil replied. "Anyone within a few miles will have felt his message. We're out of time." Silence followed. Any hopes of escape were quickly fading from Link's mind, and his heart raced frantically. He wanted to believe that he had misheard her. His eyes wandered between his companions for some reassurance that it wasn't happening. No comfort came, and an icy knot formed in the pit of his stomach. If Ganondorf caught him... No. He wouldn't let that happen. Not when so much was at stake. "Kotake, she must have used the mirror I used to communicate with him to send a warning." Avil's anger was gone, replaced with worry. "That's why she didn't chase us after the other Gerudo held her off. I should have killed that damn hag while I had a chance." "The guards loyal to her would have turned on us," Sheik pointed out. "Well, that's not going to make much difference now," Avil replied. "If Ganondorf opens a portal within the fortress to allow his minions passage, escaping may be problematic," Halvard mused. "Problematic?" Avil spat with exasperation. That's all you can say? Can we use the portal stone now? Link asked hopefully. No, we're still too far away from the wall, Sheik answered. If we hurry, we can still make it. Avil nodded and turned to her remaining guards. I want you to follow us at a distance. If anyone catches us, you can approach from behind. If they're Bulbins or Moblins? One of the Gerudo asked, her veil already raised. Attack them. If nobody sees you, we can blame their death on the Mithrins, Avil said. With a quick salute, the remaining guards disappeared, and Link felt more exposed than ever. Why did you send them away? He asked Avil. So Ganondorf doesn't know they were helping me, Avil replied. Come on, we have to move, now! They bolted down the narrow street, exiting into a wider road. However, much to their dismay, a horde of moblins marched around a corner. Their guttural voices rose in excitement as they spotted the escaping trio. Or what they thought was an escaping trio. Several roared and snarled as the shadowy forms of Gerudo leaped out of the darkness, their halberds and blades twirling in a dance of death. Seizing the chance to escape, Avil led the way down a different route, only to find more moblins here. The hunters became the hunted, as more Gerudo jumped from the rooftops and onto the street below, blades gleaming in the faint moonlight. The moblins shrieked and howled as they died, some panicking and trying to flee before the Gerudo could cut them down. The Gerudo named Shinju reappeared at the head of the attack, shouting for Avil to try fleeing down a third path. Avil hastened for Link and Halvard to follow, and they fled into the narrow street. It was empty, and they broke through into a plaza, headed right for the wall. Almost there, Halvard yelled. That was when Link spotted Kotake. She was flying towards them, flourishing her hand as she sent a stream of blue light shooting in their direction. He rose his shield, shouting a warning. The spell bounced off Link's shield, slamming into an unfortunate Bulbin who was turned into the most grotesque ice sculpture Link had seen yet. Halvard, how about getting us out of here now? Avil yelled. We're too spread out. Get beside me, he shouted. Gerudo were pouring into the plaza, the faint light illuminating their veiled faces. There was no way for Link to tell if they were friend or foe, except for Avil's word. Kotake swooped in front of him, her hand raised again. But the blast of ice never came. As the witch flew towards him, she suddenly fell from her broom and crashed to the ground. Her broom dropped after her, hitting the ground with a splintering crunch. Stunned, it took Link a moment to realize that a single arrow had pierced Kotake's throat. The witch gasped horribly, her blood pooling onto the ground. Link looked up at one of the nearby buildings. Moonlight bathed the tall structure, and there on the roof stood a single Gerudo, her face veiled and a bow held before her. Avil and Halvard rode their horses beside Epona and came to a halt, staring at the witch. Could this mean the curse was broken, and the Gerudo were no longer brainwashed? All because the witches had been overconfident? Shinju stepped into the plaza, regarding the witch with an expression of purest loathing. She raised her halberd, as if intending to end the witch's suffering. The blow never came. Instead, Shinju lowered her weapon, turned her back on the witch, and strode away, leaving Kotake to drown in her own blood. Oh good, we are so getting out of here now, Avil said, looking at the corpse of the witch. We just killed the Twinrova sisters! Does that mean the Gerudo are no longer brainwashed? Link asked. The spell will take a while to wear off. At least that's what Moriko told me, she said. She clasped her head again and grunted in pain. Besides... Avil glanced towards one of the empty streets branching off the plaza. Without warning, she jumped from the back of her mare and began to run towards the alley. Avil, what are you doing? Sheik yelled. Avil turned. It was too dark and she was too far for Link to make out her features well. I'm buying us some time, she called, the noise of the distant battle making it difficult to hear her. She vanished down the alley, and Shinju followed close behind. As Gerudo and Moblins marched into the plaza, Link realized there was no way out. A sudden chill crept down his spine, and the hairs on his neck stood up. He sensed Ganondorf before he saw him, a silhouetted figure clad in a long cloak. Link pulled on Epona's reins, allowing her to twist about in the hopes of finding somewhere that would give them a way out. Nothing. Suddenly, the plaza seemed too small, and he was surrounded by the faces of Blinn and Gerudo. Trapped, he thought. We're trapped. He looked at Sheik, or where he knew Sheik was, just in time to see her become visible. She cursed, as whatever spell Ganondorf had cast sapped the power from her medallion. Without warning, a blast of lightning went crackling through the air and into the ground beside Sheik's horse. The animal reared, screaming, and threw Sheik from the saddle. She hit the ground hard. Sheik! Link jumped off Epona. Somewhere, Halvard cursed and yelled after him, but Link ignored him as he raced towards Sheik. Before he was halfway towards her, Sheik was on her feet. She saw Link and then her mouth fell open. Link, behind you! He spun around in time to see one of the Gerudo charging towards him with a spear. His sword connected with her lance, knocking it to one side. A knife buried itself in the Gerudo's shoulder, thrown from somewhere behind him. The woman faltered, and then, acting on honed battle instincts, Link plunged the Master Sword into her midriff. Her eyes widened as she looked down at the gash across her abdomen. There was a brief flicker of astonishment as she recognized Link's blade, and then the life left her eyes. Link stared, frozen and numb, revulsion welling up inside him. In his mind, he could still see the look in the Gerudo's eyes as the sacred blade struck her. The sword trembled in his hand. He had killed before, out of necessity. But this wasn't just some monster that Ganondorf used for his own purposes. She was a person, with a family, and loved ones. In that regard, she was not so different from him. He vaguely heard Navi say it wasn't his fault, but he didn't answer her. His stomach heaved, and he scrambled desperately to yank the mask off, tearing it off his face and throwing it to one side as he vomited over his boots. His legs nearly gave out, right over the pool of sick.
The first time is always the worst.
Ganondorf's voice was cold, sounding almost casual. Halvard and Sheik came to his side, both looking aghast. Link couldn't believe what he'd just heard. He had just murdered one of Ganondorf's own people, and yet Ganondorf sounded as though this was no big deal. Did the King of the Gerudo really have such a disregard for the lives that served under him? Some of the Gerudo were looking uncomfortably at Ganondorf, and Link wasn't the only one taken aback. Some were looking at him with expressions of outright hostility, which they quickly hid when he turned in their direction. Ganondorf regarded the corpse of the witch for a moment.
Poor Kotake. You were always overconfident. Perhaps when I finish reviving you, you will be more careful.
He looked back up at Link, his cold eyes boring into Link's own. Halvard, why isn't the stone working? Sheik whispered. I can't stop him like I did last time. Not with the Gerudo protecting him. I don't think they're all protecting him, Navi said quietly. Either way, he's blocking the spell, Halvard whispered. We're trapped.
Ah, where are my manners?
Ganondorf drawled.
Welcome, hero of time, to my fortress.
He twisted from Link to Sheik with a twisted, unpleasant smile.
I must say, I'm rather surprised to see your Sheikah friend still alive.
Ganondorf trailed off. His eyes turned from Sheik to Halvard. Halvard's gaze met Ganondorf's, the latter narrowing their eyes until they resembled slits. His next words were for Link.
You, hero of time, have something that belongs to me. I will make you a deal, kid. Give me the Triforce of Courage, and I will spare your life.
What kind of a deal is that? Link spat. We both know you're lying. You proved that 7 years ago.
If you're going to be disagreeable, we can do this the hard way.
With a snap of his fingers, Ganondorf gestured for one of the moblins to come forward. It was holding a small figure in its grubby hand, its claws digging into the flesh of her arm. It was enough to draw blood and elicit a gasp from the young girl, as she was thrown roughly in front of Ganondorf. No, Link thought, the bottom dropping out of his stomach. She was a Kokiri. Ganondorf hauled the girl to her feet by her hair, and she cried out in pain. Navi gasped. Sheik swore. Torchlight flickered off the Kokiri's pale and childlike face. Ganondorf's sword was held beside her. The Kokiri whimpered, and Link's insides nodded in sickening horror. He knew what Ganondorf intended. You sick bastard! A voice swore in Link's mind, almost taking him by surprise. Link's horror subsided when he saw the girl's pleading eyes, giving way to rage. All he could feel was the same fury he felt towards Dark Link when the demon massacred the Zora at Lake Hylia.
Let her go!
Link growled, a reckless fury building inside of him. Before Link knew what he was doing, he took a step towards Ganondorf. Sheik stopped him, grabbing his arm and offering the slightest shake of her head.
You ought to listen to your betters more often, boy,
Ganondorf said, his voice growing dangerous.
Drop your weapons, and I might consider sparing her. Or I can let the Blinn have her.
This provoked a sob from the girl, and Link tightened the grip on his sword, almost as though he were trying to crush it. The gods will curse you if you do this, Halvard warned him. Ganondorf gave a harsh bark of laughter.
They already have. For generations my people have struggled to survive, cursed with a blight that makes nearly every male child stillborn. Your race almost wiped out the Kokiri. And what did the goddesses do? Nothing. I razed an entire kingdom to the ground. And what did they do? Nothing. They don't care about Hyrule. They mean to destroy it. But I can stop them.
You don't know that, Halvard retorted. You don't even know if your attempts to prevent Hyrule from being destroyed are what caused the flood in the first place. Behind Ganondorf, something was happening. The Gerudo were whispering amongst themselves, their eyes fixed on their king. Their looks had gone from hostility to outright loathing. One of the Gerudo bravely stepped forward, stopping a few feet from Ganondorf. Let her go, Ganondorf, she said, her voice firm. It was Shinju. Now! Link had no doubt Shinju's lack of formality was intentional. She didn't see Ganondorf as her king. Ganondorf seemed taken aback by her actions, his eyes widening slightly. It was as if a spark had been lit, starting something that couldn't be undone. More Gerudo stepped forward, their weapons drawn. Ganondorf stiffened, his eyes darting between the Gerudo as they formed a circle around him. Their blades weren't pointed at Shinju. They were pointed at him.
What is the meaning of this?
Ganondorf demanded. He sounded stunned, confused even. There was a sound of more blades being drawn, and soon, Blinz and Gerudo were staring down the shafts and blades of each other's weapons. Link didn't like where this was going. He could feel the tension between the Gerudo and the Blinn as it boiled. There was hatred in the eyes of some of the Gerudo, and some of the Blinn shuffled back uneasily. Holding her halberd warningly in front of her, Shinju grabbed the Kokiri girl by the arm and pulled her to the side. Ganondorf's eyes flashed with anger, but he did not move to stop her, nor did he stop the Gerudo who dashed to Shinju's side to grab the Kokiri. Perhaps he was too stunned to do anything, taken aback that his own people were openly defying him. The Kokiri girl whimpered, sobbing, and clutching the cloak of her rescuer, who, holding the girl tightly, quickly melted back into the crowd.
You!
Ganondorf's eyes burned with fury. His mouth was a flat line.
This is treason!
He spat. And then for all to hear,
I am your king!
Before anyone could move, one of the Gerudo slipped through the crowd, her face veiled. There was a sudden glint of metal shining in torchlight, and Ganondorf's eyes bulged. Shinju stepped back, her mouth open in shock. Ganondorf looked down, his expression stunned, his fingers moving to touch the sharp steel that protruded from his chest. He touched the tip of the scimitar, as if unable to convince himself of the reality that he'd just been run through by one of his own people. "You were a good man once, Ganondorf Dragmire," the Gerudo said fiercely, and Link recognized Avil's voice as she ignored the commotion stirring around her.
You stabbed me?
Ganondorf gasped, spitting blood.
Why?
In response, Avil wrenched her sword free, and then with her free hand, she shoved Ganondorf forward, letting his body topple onto the sand-smeared stones. "I'm doing what you could not. I'm saving our people from this madness," Avil replied. "You are no king, Ganondorf Dragmire. Not anymore." Ganondorf was gone. Dead. Link was so stunned, he almost forgot to breathe. A strange hush fell over the gathered crowd, while the Blinn muttered guttural curses in their native tongue. Scuffles broke out, and some of the Blinn tried to run forward, only to find a halberd lowered in their path. At that moment, one scuffle turned deadly, and a Bulbin screamed as a Gerudo thrust a knife into his belly. In that instant, something snapped, and the tension in the air snapped like a broken cord. The Bulbins and Moblins charged. The Gerudo answered with halberds and swords, while Avil stood at the center of the tempest of steel, looking stunned at what she'd just done. Griffins circled above. Mithrin riders, who had been watching the rebellion unfold, dispersed and flew beyond the wall. Did that mean they were retreating while they worked out what was going on? They would probably send in spies to work out what was happening, if they hadn't done so already. Some of the Bulbins broke off from their fight with the Gerudo, charging right towards Link's small group, who'd been largely ignored as the fighting broke out. Scimitars flourishing, Avil jumped in front of Link. She slew one Bulbin, blades twirling as she struck another. She had separated herself from her kin, and now stood alone. One spear hit its target, slicing open her thigh. Avil screamed, twisting around and slashing her sword through her attacker. "Avil!" Sheik yelled, snatching a bow and quiver from Link's now deceased attacker. "Go!" Avil shouted, her voice thick with pain. "I'll hold them off! Just get to the temple and find Naboris! I'll manage the rest!" She turned around, scimitars dancing through the air, as she hacked through a Moblin, and then swung her blades into the neck of another. Her attacks were getting slower, and several of her sisters rushed to help her. Sheik fired arrow after arrow, each one striking an eye. "Now!" Halvard yelled. Sheik's horse had bolted, but Halvard managed to call his to him with a whistle. They quickly gathered close to Sheik as she sent another shaft flying into a Moblin's eye. Halvard said something, and a ring of yellow light surrounded the air. As he did, Link spotted Ganondorf's body and noticed the gauntlet on his left hand was glowing. A second later, the Gerudo King vanished. But the fortress was spinning out of focus, and Link was frozen at the spot. He watched as a lone Bulbin split from its companions. Charging straight at Link's small group, a dagger raised, there was a glint of triumph in its eyes. The Gerudo hadn't seen it, nor had Sheik. Link cried out a warning, but Sheik's attention was focused on kicking away a Moblin spear. She dropped her bow, reached out for her blade, her other assailant still unnoticed, and slammed a knife into the moblin's throat. The Bulbin behind her charged. No. Then everything turned into a blur. The stone in Halvard's hand glowed, and the fortress vanished. Moments later, the world came back into focus as the portal stone brought them out of the fortress. Sheik buckled, her weight slamming into Link. He caught her, and it was then that he saw the blade protruding from her stomach.